Let's talk about guest experts for a moment. I had my first negative experience, or partially negative experience, with a guest expert speaker last week. And I've thought about it for about a week and wanted to share my takeaways. So, um, I've made a post, an article in the community about something I've done a couple of times now. I think this is my third time doing it. And this is my first time doing it with this particular local business owner, where it's a good introductory writing project where my junior students choose local businesses that they want to support. We learn about what it means to be a local business owner and how that's different from running a corporate business, and the difference of supporting local businesses versus big businesses. And one of the ways that I kick that off is by getting them food from a local place. The kids then practice the critique skills that we've been writing on to write critiques for the business owner. We give the business owner that critique, and then the following week, he or she comes in and um, evaluates the quality of their critique and talks about how they use that in their work, and then we parlay that into learning about local businesses from a direct source. Okay, so like I said, this is my third time doing this, and it was my first time doing with this particular business owner, and we ran into it started off great. Okay, most of the kids really enjoyed the food. Those who had criticism did a good job of being kind, helpful, and specific with their criticism. The owner was very receptive of criticism. In fact, there was an example where the owner is probably going to make a menu change because the student suggested if the menu were more specific, it would have been more accurate, and she would have known to expect this thing that she got. And the owner gave her credit for that and said, "Yeah, we're probably going to change the menu because that's a good point." So it was an awesome experience on that end. The owner did a really good job of talking about critique and evaluating the students, telling them where they did well and what's valuable to her, and then talked about her perspective of having to give feedback to her employees in a way that is going to be productive and that they're going to be receptive of, and learned about local businesses and so forth. So that was great. Where things struggled was, in many cases, experts on a given subject are not expert teachers, and they are not expert presenters. They are not expert public speakers. You see this sometimes in a TED Talk where, like, you'll have a scientist who is an expert in that field but is clearly nervous to talk in front of a whole bunch of people and does not have a lot of like presentation experience, or this is the biggest presentation they've ever given. So this particular small business owner didn't have a problem with speaking. It was not nervous anyway, but also was not brief, was not very good at sharing the air, and she proceeded to talk for about 50 minutes straight. Now, my students had prepared questions. We'd expected her to be there for about 20, 25 minutes. So she was there for double the time we expected. And it wasn't until the very end, like we almost ran out of time in class before we kind of lightning round asked a few questions in there. Past the maybe first 10 or 15 minutes of really good feedback, she went off the, and this was an older woman. It's been a long time since she was in school, and proceeded to straight up lecture to a captive audience. And to my students' credit, they did pretty well of hanging in there and listening and trying to pay attention. But it was a slog. It was a struggle. I spent the last 20 minutes waiting for an opportunity that I could interrupt and prompt her to, "Hey, we've got some questions for you, and let's interact with the students here." And she just, boom, 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 boom. It was a struggle. Now, I had also met with this person 3 times before. I met with her in the summer to discuss coming in. I met with her at the start of the school year, like the week before, just to double check and explain again. Hey, here's what we're gonna do. Here's the plan. Um, and then I met when I dropped off their criticisms, um, and she got to see them for the first time. And then we went over again. Hey, here's what we're gonna do. You're gonna come in, give them some, evaluate their feedback, talk to them a little bit about this, and then they're gonna have questions for you. So, despite that, it was a much more long-winded, less engaging experience than what I wanted to be for my kids. And I've had this told to me from some other perspectives. Um, Business and personal finance, it can be exciting or it can be very not exciting. And I've had CTE teachers that teach that class tell me that they brought in someone from a bank to talk and it was a snoozeville. So this is the risk that you're going to run when you're bringing in people that are not expert orators. They're not expert teachers. They are experts in this thing. Okay. And you really don't know until they're in the classroom in front of a bunch of people how good they're going to be at interacting with young people, and how receptive those young people are going to be to this person. So, in hindsight, I don't know what I could have done differently in this case. It's just a risk that you're going to run when you're bringing in a new person that's talking to young people for the first time. And I met with her several times, and I did the best that I could to make that as good as it possibly could be. So what do? For the future, if you're looking back on it, and with the benefit of hindsight, you still feel, I guess with hindsight, I'd have picked a different business owner, but with the benefit of hindsight, what do? Besides, hey, in the future, pick somebody else. Well, it's not necessarily that you have to do something different, because the same exact thing worked great the other times that I've used small business owners. But you have to be willing to accept the risk and what comes with it, right? So you have to, what I did was, after that person left, I only had a few minutes left in class to just acknowledge, hey, thank you all for being as patient as you were. I understand that was a little bit long, and she talked a lot and gave you a lot of things. Now, another thing that I didn't mention, she also got political a couple of times. She was very politically biased, and talked about things like the minimum wage and things like that from a very business owner, particularly a small business owner perspective. And that wasn't what my kids signed up for. That's not what she was there to do, but that came up. So, hey, thank you all for listening. Thank you all for being patient. We'll debrief this. We'll talk about this tomorrow. Okay. And then in class, you own into the students that, hey, I invited her into this classroom. She did the best she could. She's not a teacher. You all did a good job of doing your best and listening. But there were also some political narratives that came up where somebody was kind of preaching politics to you as a captive audience, and that's not fair. So the best thing that I could do there was acknowledge that, talk about how that's somebody's subjective opinion, offer the counter narrative. Hey, just so you know, what she was coming in and when she was sharing political opinions, that's not the same thing as your government teacher teaching you about how the government works. Okay. And you're in a classroom and you're a captive audience. Let's acknowledge that. So here are counter narratives. Other people might argue this thing that's the opposite of what she was arguing. And there's, congressional arguments about this stuff all the time. So it's not fair for someone to come in and preach one side of a political narrative to you. So you do damage control on the back end, and you celebrate the good things, and you say, hey, let's lean into these positive things about that experience. Let's use these parts that we were hoping to get out of that, and just understand that guest experts aren't always, and in fact rarely are, expert educators. And it's our job to fill in the gaps. Sometimes on the front end, if you know that this is going to be challenging, and definitely on the back end if you get a little bit blindsided like I did. But it's not an excuse to be scared of bringing in experts in the future.